Hey everybody, welcome back to another Film of the Week. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late. Excuse me if I sound a little congested. I just got back from the beach not too long ago, so got a little sunburn going on. But hope you guys this week's were great. Hope you guys' summers are off to a good start. So I'm trying to bring back some of these old segments, the Film of the Weeks, Blind Tuesdays, trying to bring them back. But I just get a little bit lazy and I don't uh, just commit to watching a film here at home. I usually like to be out and about. But I do want to talk about this because I find it interesting, especially in anticipation for an upcoming DC film. That being, of course, Superman, being directed by James Gunn. Which we'll talk more Superman stuff probably closer to the release. So be on the lookout maybe for a review or so in the future. But to discuss something DC related, I would say the crown jewel of DC. That film that we will be discussing today is, of course, The Dark Knight, which was co-written and directed by Christopher Nolan, also written with his brother Jonathan Nolan. This is the second of the Nolan trilogy, the first of which, of course, was Batman Begins, which came out in 2005. And then later on, we would also have The Dark Knight Rises, which would come out in 2012. Came out in 2008, so about 3 years after Batman Begins was released, after Christopher Nolan reinvented the just in terms of the film language, in terms of just how visually you can tell a Batman story. Christopher Nolan kind of really changed that for the better. And then we get to this specific film, which takes place a couple of years or so after the events of Batman Begins. Bruce Wayne, who is played by Christian Bale, is now, in full swing in his Batman motif, and a new threat has arrived at Gotham City in the form of the Joker, which is played by Heath Ledger. And whilst Batman is dealing with this, the introduction of a district attorney named Harvey Dent, played by Aaron Eckhart, comes into the picture and is caught within this battle that's forming between that of Batman and Joker, and ultimately a fate that is destined for him, that is being laid out, that may in fact present a point of contention, and perhaps uh, a point of just of crisis in terms of where Gotham moves forward in the face of this threat that is the Joker. Now, The Dark Knight, of course, is extremely noteworthy when we talk about the superhero genre. Of course, many films take to The Dark Knight. In terms of Nolan as a filmmaker, Dark Knight definitely stands out as one of his better films. Nolan, of course, a filmmaker that I'm interested in, but a filmmaker that I also take issues with. He's very, very hollow in terms of his emotional sensibilities. But aesthetically, his films, and just technically speaking, there's lots to love in his filmmaking. And The Dark Knight is definitely one of those films. On a technical level, there is a lot of greatness to find, especially within its framing, within its overall tints. I like this blue tint that takes priority within The Dark Knight. Kind of gives a noir, but also kind of just just a specific texturing and style. And the overall mood that Nolan also portrays in his films, this heightened sense of tension, and this, the bombastic score that's usually supplied by the person that he works with, Hans Zimmer, which in this film's case, according to the Wikipedia page, the music was done by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, so they both collaborated on the score of The Dark Knight. But that classic Hans Zimmer, type of, the whoms that people, refer to, you could find them, of course, here in The Dark Knight. And that sort of behavior that score takes within the context of this film presents, again, that sense of tension that you find in a lot of Nolan's work. And, you know, the most important thing to note about The Dark Knight is, obviously it being in a comic book, movie based on a comic book. Um, you have your usual things that you'd find within the Batman, mythos. You'll have like a Batmobile, you'll have a Joker, you'll have all these little nooks and crannies, little things that you'll find here and there. But what I find very, very noteworthy about The Dark Knight, that a film like Logan that came out of many, many years later, yet to replicate, is that sense of true distinction within this genre. Because The Dark Knight is not a comic book movie to its core. A lot of these films that adapt these source materials are innately comic book movies. They operate within a certain formula, a certain style, a certain tone, a certain mood. And as of just now, we are just people are just starting to pick up on that, and they're starting to understand just a certain repetition that is within this genre. When it comes to Nolan's movies, specifically that of Dark Knight, it is a film that is made within the context of a crime drama. This is properly that of a crime drama. If the Batman character were not to exist and Christian Bale was playing something else entirely, it wouldn't make any difference. The film would still work on its own, and it still functions. It's not a movie that needs or it requires that of Batman to exist. Batman is just a part of the story, and Batman is just a visual representation of what they're trying to get at within the confines of morality, within the confines of vigilantism. Like, all these sort of thematic ideas that the film plays with, especially that of morality, and that line between good and evil, and making choices beyond that perhaps push you within to one side or the other, that gray area within that. The whole Batman, the Batman character in The Dark Knight is just another visualization within those thematic ideas. Batman is not central to The Dark Knight. And that's what I think is very, very important about this sort of movie, is that it does not require the Batman character to make it work. And I love that about that, because every time we go to these comic book films, there's always a necessity to always like kind of recognize some sort of source material, and that sort of takes priority. With this, the priority here is the filmmaking, the storytelling, and it's done very well. Of course, a lot of Nolan's downsides are still present. There is that sense of distance when it's trying to build resonance, and it feels that it is more technically sound than emotionally speaking. But there's a lot of other things that really bring it all together. You have a really great ensemble of performances. Christian Bale, who I think is very good in this role. I mean, I know people have their issues with him, but I think he does very good in this role. You have Michael Caine, who's very good, Gary Oldman, Aaron Eckhart, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Morgan Freeman. I think all of them put in good performances. Heath Ledger especially, I think, puts in a very good performance. And many people have hailed his performance for many, many years, and deservingly so. I mean, it is a very, very great performance. Again, taking out the Joker character, if it were to be anything else, it still functions on its own. It does not require the Joker aesthetic to make that performance work. It's just a really good performance. And with everything else, that character doesn't have to be Alfred. That character doesn't have to be Two-Face. Like, everybody functions well in this movie because they are operating within a certain framework. They're not looking at it as a comic book. They're looking at it as a piece of storytelling, as a film. And that's why The Dark Knight works as well as it does. There's a lot of great things about it on an aesthetic level, thematically speaking, by overall tone. It's intriguing, it's investing. There's a lot of great things about it. The only reason why I would hesitate to call it my favorite comic book movie of all time, I still give that to Logan personally, because Logan delivers on those two parts that I look for in just, generally filmmaking, but, not to whittle it down to 2 points, but that component that Nolan is missing as a filmmaker, that emotional side of him, which he taps into sometimes, Interstellar being like the closest to that. Logan just finds its way to marry interesting story with a sense of emotion and it finds that place to bond it. With The Dark Knight, it's a very interesting story, and you get great performances, very interesting style, lots of great visuals to play along with it, like a lot of great things to keep that story intriguing. But I just want that sense of passion, that sense of emotion to really drive it home. And it's just, I never get that from The Dark Knight. With Logan, I always get that. And that's why I give it to Logan still. But The Dark Knight, I still think, has so many great qualities to it. And definitely a solid piece of work. And again, extremely distinct from this genre and still stands out, and as one of the best. And I completely understand why a lot of people would call it the best because of just what it's doing on a technical level, the performances. There's a lot of great elements there. I personally favored it still Logan, but Dark Knight definitely has a lot to offer. And still today, in this, many years later, it being like 17 years later, still, has so much to offer in the context of how to make a superhero movie. The way to do it is literally just make a good movie. Don't really focus too much on the comic book aspects. Just make a good movie. That's why Thunderbolts I found to be also be pretty good, because it's not necessarily doing the comic book shtick. It's doing what a movie should do. And that's why a film like The Dark Knight gets props for me. And just generally by overall craftsmanship, by how it is built, Nolan's sensibilities, they work for me for the most part. I just wish that I just feel something when I see his movies. But what I see, what I'm hearing, how it's being acted, all that stuff, it really does win me over. And I do find myself intrigued. If not on, there's just not that emotional center that I wish Nolan would have in his movies. But yeah, those are my thoughts on The Dark Knight. I really enjoy it. I don't think it's my favorite of this genre, but definitely, a standout piece. Definitely, a standout piece for this genre. And definitely laid out a lot of, groundwork for how people will try to, it's funny though that I've read right here, it's considered a blueprint for modern superhero films, but oddly enough, you don't see a lot of movies trying to replicate The Dark Knight. They don't really try to touch it as often. So it's kind of weird how they state that, but if anything, The Dark Knight is rather untouched within this genre. I've yet to see a film really try to be that kind of movie again. And maybe it's time we try to do that again in the future. But you guys, what are your thoughts on The Dark Knight? If you guys have seen it, your thoughts on the Nolan trilogy, Nolan just generally as a filmmaker, and of course your thoughts relating to your favorite comic book movies. Of course, like I said, my favorite is Logan, but we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. And yeah. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.